Before we drift into tonight's tale of Princess Bubblegum's ethical experiments, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. Tonight we explore the soft, pink shadows of a kingdom made of sugar, ruled by a mind sharper than peppermint and colder than a frozen gumdrop when it needs to be. Princess Bubblegum. To many, she's a benevolent ruler, intelligent, graceful, endlessly resourceful. She's kept the Candy Kingdom safe from invasions, plagues, curses, and chaotic beings like the Lich and Ricardio. But what if we told you that sweetness might just be a coating? Beneath the marshmallow smiles of the Candy Kingdom lies a layer of quiet control, of surveillance, manipulation, and choices made in the name of stability. And Princess Bubblegum? She didn't just inherit a kingdom, she built it. Citizen by citizen, molecule by molecule. And when you build your people from scratch, how much freedom do you actually allow them? Bubblegum is more than a monarch. She's a scientist first, always has been. She created her kingdom's population through biochemical engineering, giving life to sugar, syrup, and gelatin. Mr. Cupcake. Starchy, Peppermint Butler, even citizens like Chico and Goliad, all of them born in a lab, designed with functions, personalities, even destinies. That means the Candy Kingdom isn't a population of random souls, it's more like a curated garden. And Bubblegum is the gardener. She decides who grows and who doesn't. What makes this so quietly chilling is that she loves her citizens, fiercely, protectively. She wants them happy and safe. But in her mind, safety and freedom don't always mix well. Think about this. When Lemongrab turned unstable, Bubblegum didn't try therapy or diplomacy. She cloned herself to rule beside him. When he grew more dangerous, she didn't stage a trial or public hearing. She simply took power back, reabsorbed her clone, installed Gumball-style structures of control. No election, no debate, just a royal override. Because in her world, order is more important than openness. In one episode, she even places tracking devices on them. For their protection, she says. But when does protection become control? Let's pause and imagine this. You're a citizen in the Candy Kingdom. You were literally created by your ruler in a lab, your personality baked into you. Your emotions, your instincts programmed like sugar code. You wake up every day in a world where your queen knows how you were made, what you're likely to do, and maybe even why you exist. There's comfort in that, sure, but also something unsettling. Now drift with me into one of her earliest creations, Goliad, a candy sphinx designed to take over leadership in case Bubblegum ever passed on. But Goliad was made with too much power and not enough wisdom. Even if it means playing God with gumdrops. But what if the candy people ever realize this? Do they know they were made in a lab? Do they care? Or has Bubblegum designed them not to ask? It's the kind of question that doesn't keep her up at night because she already has the answer. She built it into them. Now float with that thought. Let it drift through your mind like powdered sugar on a breeze. Because the more you look at the Candy Kingdom, the more it starts to feel like a kingdom of dolls, bright-eyed, happy, humming their songs. But if you listen closely, some of those smiles might be glued on. And somewhere in the tallest tower their queen watches, not with cruelty, but with calculation. Because she knows that when you're made of sugar, the world can eat you alive. So better to be ruled than ruined. Now let's gently walk into a deeper question. If you create life, do you own it? Princess Bubblegum never says it aloud, but her actions whisper it constantly. She refers to her citizens as my candy people. Not the citizens or the kingdom, but hers. There's an intimacy in that phrasing, but also possession. She nurtures them like a mother, but governs them like assets. Take the moment when the kingdom collapses literally. Instead of mourning the destruction, she immediately begins rebuilding. Not just structures, but people. She gathers materials, mixes up new batches, stirs life back into sugar. Because to her, a citizen isn't a singular, irreplaceable soul. They're a formula, a repeatable combination of chemicals and spark. If Starchy melts in the heat of battle, well, PB can just make another Starchy. Or even a better one. And in that quiet logic, something very human gets lost. But she's not heartless. That's what makes her so endlessly layered. She does care. She does feel. She grieves. She worries. She tries to do what's right. It's just that her idea of right often looks like control. There's a reason why the Candy Kingdom, under her rule, has almost never seen rebellion. No uprisings, no coups, no protests. Not because everything is perfect, but because everything is programmed to appear that way. Even Finn and Jake, outsiders to her world, occasionally glance sideways at her methods. Finn especially has voiced discomfort with some of her choices, but PB always reassures him. Not with warmth, but with facts, statistics, logical reasoning. As if morality can be measured like pH levels in a beaker. She operates in a way that feels almost corporate. Like a CEO managing employees made in-house. Every problem gets a solution. Every variable gets isolated. But life isn't a lab. And that's where her story starts to crack. Let's float for a moment into an episode you might remember, Too Young. In that brief window where Princess Bubblegum is technically too young to rule, Peppermint Butler panics. The entire Candy Kingdom panics. Why? Because without her, they don't know how to function. There are no succession plans, no citizen councils, no systems that allow power to flow naturally. Because she is the system. That's not an accident. It's design. And what about her attitude toward other rulers, other forms of governance? She treats many with polite disdain. Flame Princess's volatile rule is watched like a science experiment. The Earl of Lemongrab's reign is micromanaged, edited, corrected. Even when Bubblegum's power is taken away, she never truly relinquishes influence. She waits, watches, prepares, and eventually reclaims. The moment she returns to power, she's smiling, kind, grateful. But you can feel it, the tension in the air, the snapback of control returning to her hands like a snapped rubber band. The kingdom breathes easier, but it also forgets how to breathe on its own. We can even trace this pattern back to the very idea of candy itself. Sweet, soft, perishable. It needs preservation. It needs someone to make sure it doesn't melt, rot, or collapse into goo. And that someone is Bubblegum. She uses this vulnerability as both justification and leverage. If the candy people are fragile, they must be protected. If they're cheerful but simple, they must be guided. And if they don't question her, then she must be doing something right. Right? Let's ease into one final thought for this part of the tale. What happens if the citizens do question her? What if one of them starts to wonder why they were made the way they were? Why Peppermint Butler knows dark spells? Why Starchy sometimes whispers strange things when no one's around? What if someone starts asking about the towers locked with code? The sealed chambers under the castle? The freezer marked classified? Does Bubblegum answer them? Or does she edit the problem out? You see, in science, if an experiment behaves unpredictably, you can remove it from the results. You can sterilize the data. In the Candy Kingdom, unpredictable means dangerous. Dangerous means unstable. And unstable, well, that just means it's time to cook up a better version. So maybe, just maybe, that smiling, pink-cheeked ruler isn't just watching over her people. Maybe she's monitoring them, carefully, constantly, silently. And from her quiet lab tower, surrounded by vials, wires, and backup clones, she whispers to herself, everything is under control. Now let's float a little deeper, into a quieter part of her castle. A place most citizens don't know exists. The lab beneath the library, where ideas are born in silence and ethics are left outside the door. This is where Princess Bubblegum spends her longest nights. Not in her throne room, but in her lab coat, surrounded by equations, DNA strands, unstable goo, and quiet machines that hum like lullabies. Some of her greatest creations never even make it upstairs. There's a moment easily missed when we see a vault door sealed with magical runes and scientific code. What's inside? She doesn't say. No citizen asks, and yet she checks on it, often. Because being a ruler to her isn't about meetings or speeches. It's about containment, prevention, and above all, control. There's a phrase she once said to Finn in a moment of rare honesty. Sometimes you have to do things behind people's backs for their own good. That's not a villain talking. That's not a tyrant shouting commands. That's a ruler whispering a bedtime story she wrote herself, where every ending is peaceful, every outcome predicted. But even the best equations can break down when you introduce chaos. And in Bubblegum's world, chaos is anything she didn't create herself. Let's look at Lemongrab again. He wasn't born from scratch. He was made, but with imperfection built in. She molded him from her own DNA, but gave him too much autonomy, too much unpredictability. And what happened? He spiraled into cruelty, into madness, into cannibalism even. Her response wasn't to de-escalate. It was to re-enter the equation, to adjust the variables. She grew a clone, not of Lemongrab, but of herself, so that the power dynamic could be stabilized. Two rulers, one part chaos, one part control. And when that still didn't work, she didn't adapt the system. She deleted it. But the deletion wasn't loud, no fireworks, no judgment. Just the quiet removal of a piece that didn't fit. This is the sweet dictatorship in its truest form. There are no screams in the streets, no grand purges or brutal punishments. Just silence, followed by a new version. Better, cleaner, more obedient. Even in the case of her uncle Gumball, the very relative she once trusted to help build her kingdom, when he rebelled, challenged her vision, and sought his own path, she didn't negotiate. She turned him into a simple-minded punch bowl. Literally, he was a threat to her order, so she simplified him. Made him harmless, like a child in an adult's body, like candy. And years later, when he regained his form and returned for revenge, the kingdom gasped in shock. "But Princess Bubblegum!" She barely flinched, because she already had contingencies. Plans layered on plans. The game had never stopped for her. Even her brief dethroning wasn't a failure in her eyes. It was a momentary disruption. A chance to learn, rebuild, refine. And when she returned to power, she brought with her a quiet promise. Never spoken, but deeply felt. This time, nothing will go wrong. Not because the kingdom is perfect, but because she'll make it so. Even if that means removing imperfections by hand. Even if that means you. Now let's take a breath. Let that settle. Because even though this might sound dark, even unsettling, it's also kind of sad. Bonibel Bubblegum isn't a monster. She doesn't enjoy control for control's sake. She's not evil. She doesn't crave pain. She's just scared. Scared of losing what she's built. Scared of failure. Scared of letting people down. And when you're scared, sometimes you grip things a little too tightly. And when your hands are made of candy, that grip leaves cracks. Some of those cracks show up in small ways. Like when her voice falters in front of the people. Or when she lets out a sigh in her private garden. Or when Marceline confronts her, not as a subject, but as a person, an equal. In those moments, we see something rare. A ruler who doesn't know how to let go. A scientist who can't stop editing. And a woman who's built a whole world out of sugar, but has no idea how to live in it without walls. So the Candy Kingdom continues. The citizens dance, the sun shines, and Bubblegum watches, monitoring sugar levels, adjusting behavior patterns, deleting anomalies, all in the name of love, all in the name of safety, all in the name of peace. But peace built on obedience isn't peace. It's a lullaby song just loud enough to keep the questions away. And tonight maybe you hear it too. That soft hum under the floorboards, the clink of glass, the whisper of one last edit before bed. Because in Princess Bubblegum's world, the night isn't for sleeping. It's for refining. Now let's drift slowly into the deeper question. One that doesn't have a clean answer. One that maybe, just maybe, even Princess Bubblegum hasn't solved. Do the candy people know? Do they understand what she is, what they are? Is there a quiet awareness buried beneath all those bright eyes and cheerful songs? A flicker of self-recognition? Sometimes a glance lingers too long. Sometimes a candy citizen stutters in their script, like they're forgetting a line they were never supposed to know they were reading. And sometimes they remember things they shouldn't. In the episode, The Vault, we learn that even memories can be suppressed and buried in the subconscious. What if the candy people, sweet and simple as they seem, are carrying fragments of truths deep within their jelly cores? What if one day, one of them wakes up and questions everything? Would Bubblegum allow it? Or would she fix it? We've seen it before. The quiet removal of problematic elements. The invention of solutions no one asked for, like Rattleballs, her robotic enforcer, tucked away in a hidden chamber beneath the city. A failed prototype of peacekeeping, exiled not for failure, but for excessive loyalty. Too obedient, too violent, too close to her own worst tendencies. So she shut him down, hid him, and yet never destroyed him. Because Bubblegum never really deletes her mistakes. She archives them, carefully, lovingly, like old lab notes on the shelf. like blueprints in a drawer, labeled, sorted, stored. Because someday they might still be useful. Or worse, they might be all she has left. Now drift with me to a quiet hallway in the castle. It's early morning, fog rising. The candy citizens are still asleep in their little houses shaped like gumdrops and taffy. But Bubblegum is already awake. She walks with her hands behind her back, eyes scanning, always observing. She checks the surveillance monitors. She opens her notebook. She runs a check on the Gumball Guardians, still standing tall outside the gates, their hollow faces aimed toward the horizon. Those massive constructs, her first line of defense, built to obey, built to protect, but also built without empathy. They do not question orders. They do not ask why. And if one day she told them to protect the kingdom from its own people, would they hesitate? She's never needed to test that. But she could. She probably already has. And here's the thing that lingers like a soft ache. None of this started from malice. It started from fear. The Great Mushroom War left the world broken. Magic replaced science. Chaos threatened everything. And Bubblegum, a lone scientist, alone among monsters, took it upon herself to rebuild, to restart society, to give the world sweetness again. And she did. But in doing so, she gave herself all the power. And that power changed her. Not in an explosive, villainous way, but in small steps, in long nights, in quiet compromises, until one day she wasn't just ruling the kingdom. She was the kingdom, the architect, the observer, the editor. Now, before we leave this segment behind, let's let our thoughts wander just a little more. What would happen if Bubblegum ever stepped away? Not forcibly, but willingly. What would happen to the Candy Kingdom? Would it crumble? Would the people freeze in confusion? Would the Gumball Guardians lock the gates and wait for her return? Or would something unexpected happen? Would they begin to change? To become more than sugar and cheer? To think? To question? That's the paradox of control. The more tightly you hold on, the less prepared your world is to exist without you. And maybe Bubblegum knows that. Maybe that's why she never truly sleeps. Why she surrounds herself with backups, clones, countermeasures, and contingency plans. Not because she's power-hungry, but because she's afraid to let go. There's an unspoken loneliness in her that even Marceline sometimes notices. A heaviness that comes from being the smartest one in the room forever. From being surrounded by people you made but never quite relate to. From building a paradise and realizing it was only perfect because no one else had a say. So she smiles. She waves. She pats heads and stirs beakers. She says everything is fine. And maybe it is. For now. But beneath the sugar, beneath the perfection, is a girl in a lab coat standing in the ruins of the old world, trying to build something that lasts. Even if it means ruling alone, even if it means no one ever sees the cracks in the candy shell. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let your thoughts drift across the towers of the Candy Kingdom. Let them settle beneath the gumdrop roofs and the glowing castle walls. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel her watching, not with cruelty, not even with judgment, just with purpose. Because Princess Bubblegum doesn't rest. She plans. We're back now, deeper inside the castle walls. The moonlight filters through stained sugar glass windows, casting pink and violet shadows across the cold tile floors. And beneath it all, hidden far below where the candy citizens dance and dream, is a place few have ever seen. Princess Bubblegum's true kingdom. Her laboratory. But calling it a lab almost feels too small. This isn't just a room of bubbling flasks and clicking machines. It's a cathedral of creation. The place where sugar becomes sentient. Where candy learns to think. And where a ruler armed with science and sorrow has asked one of the oldest questions in existence. Can you build a soul? Tonight we wander through that question. We begin with a hum, the gentle sound of incubators glowing in the dark, filled with soft, pulsing forms. Not quite candy, not quite alive. Not yet. This is where PB gives life its first spark. You see, she doesn't just build the candy people. She shapes them, intentionally, thoughtfully. Every citizen of the Candy Kingdom began here as a recipe, a design. Not just for their bodies, but for their minds. Think of Starchy, always nervous and suspicious. Or Cinnamon Bun, innocent and impulsive. Or Manfred, the talking piñata, somehow deeply existential. These aren't accidents of personality. They were written that way. Like programs, like poetry. Princess Bubblegum engineers behavior. She decides who will be brave, who will be loyal, who will be curious, and who will never ask the wrong questions. It's brilliant, and it's terrifying. Imagine crafting a being from nothing, giving it a voice, a laugh, and then giving it a fear, a deeply ingrained worry that keeps it from exploring too far from home. Now imagine doing that hundreds of times. She calls it population stability. But isn't it also emotional design? Is it empathy? Or is it architecture? Let's float back to Peppermint Butler. Her most trusted aide, her butler, assistant, advisor, and secretly practitioner of dark magic. He's loyal, mysterious, capable of terrifying feats. Why would a ruler design that into her staff? Some say she didn't. That he evolved beyond her original plans. That somewhere along the line, Peppermint Butler changed. And that is what frightens her most. You see, in science, even the most precise formulas can mutate. A slight temperature shift. A moment too long in the incubator. A trace of old magic in the air. And suddenly, something unexpected appears. Something independent. And in the Candy Kingdom, independence is unpredictable. Somewhere in the depth of her lab, there's a chalkboard filled with equations. Not for energy, not for chemical bonds, but for personality traits. She's cataloged the emotional spectrum, measured it in sugar ratios and brainwave curves. She has a folder labeled Joy Experiments and another called Melancholy Tolerance. She doesn't just want her citizens to be happy. She wants them to function. Because happy people don't revolt. Happy people keep systems moving. And if that happiness has to be tuned, calibrated, and updated like firmware in a robot, then so be it. There's a chilling calmness to how she talks about them sometimes. Like when she tells Finn, they're delicate. I have to be careful with how I program their emotional range. And that word, program, it slips out like she didn't mean to say it. But it says everything. Because in the living lab, emotions aren't just felt. They're assigned, past the humming wires and whispering vents, into the archives beneath the lab. This is where Bubblegum keeps her earliest notes. Binders filled with formulas, sketches of theoretical citizens, and questions written in the margins like half-forgotten prayers. Will they know pain? Does laughter need to be genuine to be effective? If a candy person breaks and I rebuild them, Are they still the same? They aren't scientific questions. Not really. They're moral ones. And morals are slippery things in a kingdom made of sugar and obedience. In one dusty drawer, we find a folder titled Abandoned Designs. Inside, diagrams of experimental beings that were never completed. One had 4 eyes and a rotating jelly core designed to monitor crowd behavior. Another, a gummy figure built to serve as a moral compass, scrapped because it began asking questions too soon. And there, quietly taped to the back of a page, a note in PB's handwriting. Too aware, too fast, scared the others. It's easy to forget that most of the Candy Kingdom is scared of change. But maybe they were made that way. And that brings us to a strange truth. If you build a world where no one is allowed to think too deeply, then the only one who can is you. That loneliness lingers over everything in the living lab. Bubblegum speaks fluently in equations, but rarely opens up emotional. She has no equals in her kingdom, only variables. She can't ask Starchy for advice. She can't cry in front of Cinnamon Bun, because they wouldn't understand. They weren't made for that. But she was. And so she keeps creating, not just to grow her kingdom, but maybe to find someone who finally gets her. Which brings us to one of her most strange and quietly haunting creations, Goliath, engineered from PB's own DNA, built to rule if she could not, a being of vast intelligence and immense power, but also designed with emotional stability. At least that was the plan. But Goliath turned out wrong. Not violent, not evil, but extremely logical. Too logical. She deduced almost immediately that freedom leads to chaos, that citizens must be controlled at all times. That thought itself could be a threat. She wanted to take away choice, to mind-link the entire kingdom into one unified consciousness. And yet, if you listen closely, that was never entirely Goliath's idea. It was absorbed, reflected. From whom? From the only person Goliath had ever known, Princess Bubblegum. PB didn't react with anger. She didn't shout. She just built a counterweight Stormo, a being of pure resistance. One mind to hold the other in eternal balance. And then she stepped back, locked both of them in a psychic standoff, and paused the problem instead of solving it. Because that's the other truth of her lab. When an experiment fails, she doesn't end it. She just seals it away. Like feelings, like mistakes, like potential friends who evolve too far outside their programming. Because that's the quiet horror of the living lab. Not the beakers or the tubes or the strange low hum of the walls, but the silence. The long, echoing silence that follows a failed creation. Not grief, not guilt. Just revision. Let's follow a soft trail now, a quiet thread of curiosity, to a question most Candy citizens would never think to ask. What am I? It starts sometimes as a dream. A moment of silence too long, where thought slips in like a breeze under the door. A flicker behind the eyes of a citizen who was never meant to pause. And once it begins, it never really goes away. There are rare Candy people who awaken, not in the loud, dramatic way of heroes or rebels, but in tiny ways. A hesitation in Peppermint Butler's voice. A glance from Chocoberry that lingers just a moment too long. Even Cinnamon Bun, once so simple, eventually changed. In fact, Cinnamon Bun is one of the clearest examples of what happens when a creation exceeds its blueprint. Early on, he was little more than comic relief, a walking pile of half-baked dough. Obedient, clumsy, sweet. But then something shifted. He gained responsibility. He traveled. He made choices that didn't fit the model. Eventually, he became a royal guard in the Fire Kingdom, far from PB's influence. And there, for the first time, he grew. Emotionally, mentally, independently. He even said no to Princess Bubblegum. Not rudely, not rebelliously, just calmly. Like someone who finally realized he was more than the sum of his sugar. And what did PB do? Nothing. She let him go. But not without a pause. Not without that brief, distant look in her eyes, the one she gives when an experiment surprises her. Because Cinnamon Bun's awakening wasn't just unusual. It was impossible. He had exceeded his code. And in that moment, the living lab became something more than a factory. It became a garden. One PB could no longer fully control. Now imagine how that must feel. To be a creator watching your creations take their own paths. For someone like Bubblegum, whose entire identity is rooted in precision, that kind of uncertainty is both terrifying and beautiful. She loves her people. There's no question. But she also fears what they could become without her steady hand. So she walks a tightrope between letting them grow and gently, silently, trimming back what grows too far. Sometimes with affection, sometimes with tools. Let's wander now to another forgotten hallway in her lab, one filled not with failed experiments, but with preserved memories. PB has, in some way, recorded everything. Not just research notes, but emotional snapshots. Data on how her people react to grief, joy, jealousy, loneliness. There's even evidence she once ran controlled social disruption drills. Subtle shifts in weather, minor shortages, small lies whispered into the system, just to see what her citizens would do. And then afterward, she'd correct them. Reset behaviors, re-encourage harmony. It was all done kindly, quietly. No punishments, no alarms. But isn't that, in a way, more unnerving? Because to Bubblegum, free will is an unstable variable. Something she allows so long as it doesn't spread. And yet, she can't help but be fascinated by it. There's a quiet tension in her that never resolves, the scientist who wants results, and the ruler who wants peace. And in between those desires live her people, sweet, soft, fragile, and slowly waking up. One of the most telling moments comes in the episode, Bonnie and Nettie. We meet Nettie, a hidden, trembling creature who lives beneath the kingdom, siphoning raw candy energy to keep everything running. He is PB's brother in a biological sense. But she hides him, protects him, keeps him isolated and dependent. Because Nettie is not ready for the world. Or maybe PB believes the world is not ready for Nettie. That episode is more than a character story. It's a metaphor. Nettie is what happens when a soul is born without the structures Bubblegum has carefully wrapped around her citizens. He's instinctual, raw, wild. He doesn't speak. He just feels. And she loves him, deeply. But she also manages him, like a delicate component in her machine. Essential, precious, but unpredictable. It's in the moments like this that we see the emotional core of Princess Bubblegum's work. It's not cold, not really. It's scared. Scared of breaking what she loves. Scared of watching it spiral into chaos. Scared that without her control, the world might hurt itself all over again. So she builds and rebuilds, tests, tunes, adjusts. And when a citizen changes, she watches, carefully, anxiously. Because if too many begin to ask questions, If too many begin to grow beyond their design, then the lab may no longer be a lab. It might become something far more unpredictable. It might become a society, a real one, where souls are not shaped but discovered, where emotions are not designed but felt, where even candy can carry weight. And in that world, Princess Bubblegum would no longer be just a creator. She would be one among many, an equal. Maybe she wants that. Maybe she fears it. Maybe she's not sure. But every day, down in the living lab, she continues to stir the beakers, to write in the margins, and to ask herself a question that never quite leaves. Did I give them too much? Or maybe, did I not give them enough? And so the lab hums on, a temple of quiet ambition, of endless care and quiet control, of sweetness and shadows. So now we find ourselves once again in that quiet tension, the space between intention and outcome, between creation and connection. Princess Bubblegum has never claimed to be a god. But in the silence of her lab, where every candy person was born, there's a divinity to her touch, a spark placed inside jelly, a purpose woven into frosting, a laugh embedded into a gumdrop. She built a world where the air smells like sugar, the sky glows with pink, and the people live without fear because she designed them not to fear. But fear is only one part of a soul. And over time, the rest of the pieces start to form whether she wants them to or not. Some candy citizens begin asking small questions. Nothing dangerous, just gentle things, like, why do I like the color blue so much? Or, what would happen if I went past the gumdrop hills? Questions without programming, curiosity without code. And it's in those moments that we see how fragile the whole system really is. Because Princess Bubblegum didn't build a utopia. She built a controlled environment. And all it takes is one stray thought, one unexpected behavior for the model to crack. But that's the beauty of life, isn't it? Even when engineered. Even when tightly bound by structure and code and supervision. Life finds a way to wander, to want, to be. And the most haunting part of all this is that Princess Bubblegum knows that. Deep down, she understands that true sentience means unpredictability. That real consciousness will eventually stretch beyond its walls. That even the sweetest kingdom cannot stay still forever. But she also knows what the world used to be. The ruins, the war, the chaos. She carries the scars of it in her memory, in her voice, in the things she doesn't say. So she keeps building her world carefully, softly, protectively. She writes lines of emotional code like lullabies. She monitors behavior like a shepherd watches sheep. And she smiles because smiling is part of the design. But sometimes, when no one's around, she stops, just for a moment. She takes off the lab coat. She sits in the stillness of her garden, and she wonders, if I stopped creating, would they keep going? It's a question with no real answer. Not yet. Because for now, the living lab is still humming, still glowing. And every week, a new citizen is born, a new life added to the soft rhythm of the kingdom. Given a name, a role, a smile, and set free into a world built entirely for them. A world where danger is distant, where emotions are easy, where nothing ever really changes, unless they change first. And maybe some of them will. Maybe as the years pass, the code will bend. Maybe one of them will wake in the middle of the night and look up at the stars and ask, What am I made of? And the answer won't come from a beaker, or a chalkboard, or even from Bubblegum herself. It will come from somewhere deeper, from the part of every being, candy or not, that grows quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. The soul. And when that day comes, Princess Bubblegum will have to decide. Does she hold on tighter? Or does she let go? Not because she's finished, but because they're finally ready. Until then, the lab stays open. The notes keep filling. And the creator keeps watching, not just with calculation, but with something that even she might not recognize at first. Hope. Hope that her people will thrive. Hope that they'll grow. Hope that they'll surprise her. Because maybe the true success of her kingdom won't be how perfectly it functions, but how gracefully it evolves. And maybe, just maybe, the sweetest thing she ever created was the possibility that one day she wouldn't be needed at all. Let's rise now, from the soft shadows of the lab to something far taller, far older, and far more silent. They stand like statues, towering over the gates of the Candy Kingdom, their faces blank, their eyes glowing, their mouths curled into eternal half-smiles that never change, no matter what they see. The Gumball Guardians. You've seen them before, maybe without really seeing. Tall, violet mechanical beings made of smooth candy shell and steel nerve. Standing perfectly still for days, weeks, maybe even longer, until something happens. Until they move. And when they do, it's never subtle. But let's back up. Tonight, let's wonder, what are they really? And more importantly, who are they watching? Most would say the Gumball Guardians are protectors loyal, passive defenders of the Candy Kingdom. They don't speak unless necessary. They don't move unless provoked. They follow commands. Or do they? Because here's the thing. They don't just guard the city from outside threats. They watch everything. From above, their unblinking gaze covers every rooftop, every street, every open courtyard. Their heads pivot with perfect precision. They record, they process, and in rare moments they judge. There's a key moment in the episode Too Young, when the Gumball Guardians determine that Princess Bubblegum, after de-aging to 13 years old, is no longer fit to rule. No one gave them this command. No one activated them. They simply made that decision, autonomously, quietly, logically. That moment, easily missed in the show's playful tone, is deeply unsettling, because it tells us something critical. The Gumball Guardians are not mindless. They are not simple machines. They have a system of logic, a sense of order, perhaps even a definition of morality. Now let your thoughts settle there for a second, because that changes everything. It means the Guardians are not just statues with laser eyes. They're judges, maybe even lawmakers in their own strange language of observation and code. They stood still through political shifts, through wars, through invasions, through PB losing and regaining her throne. But when they deemed her unfit, just a child again, vulnerable, they stepped in. Not to protect her, but to remove her. To replace her with someone more suitable. In that moment, they weren't weapons. They were reformers. So, who programmed them that way? Bubblegum, likely. But did she build that moral framework intentionally? Or did something evolve? If the Gumball Guardians have the authority to depose a ruler, then we're no longer talking about machines. We're talking about a parallel power. A silent, towering force always present, rarely questioned. It's possible PB built them as a failsafe, a backup brain, a check against her own potential errors. But as we've seen already, creations in the land of Ooh have a habit of becoming more than their creators intended. Now imagine how she must feel, knowing there are two enormous beings watching her constantly with the power to remove her from power at any time. Not out of rebellion, but out of reason. So what do the Gumball Guardians truly guard? Is it the kingdom? The people? Or is it the order of things? There's something deeply unsettling about protectors who never speak unless necessary, who never question because they don't need to, who always know what's best, even if no one ever asked. And when they do speak, it's in voices that echo like hollow thunder. Not angry, not gentle, just final. Their decisions are rarely reversible. Their sentences are delivered without emotion, because emotion would get in the way. Let's return for a moment to the day they removed PB from power. They didn't hesitate. They didn't consult anyone. They scanned her, found her unfit, and acted. To them, it wasn't personal. It wasn't even political. It was simply protocol. And that's what makes them so different from the rest of the Candy Kingdom. While the citizens sing and skip and share, the Guardians observe, always, silently gathering data. Some fans believe the Gumball Guardians are powered not just by mechanical logic, but by some form of magic. And that makes sense, because the Candy Kingdom isn't purely scientific. It's built atop a strange fusion of sugar alchemy, arcane engineering, and emotional algorithms. The Guardians may very well be the embodiment of that fusion. Machines that think like spells, sentinels with a sense of right and wrong, etched in pink crystal logic. Now imagine this. Somewhere in a hidden chamber only PB can access, there might be a screen. A live feed from the Guardians' inner cores. Not showing video. Not showing faces. But data. Temperatures. Pulse rates. Psychological readings. Patterns in citizen movement. Deviations from ideal behavior. Imagine a world where your protectors don't just watch for danger. They watch you. Your habits, your expressions, your doubts. And maybe they don't act on most of it. Maybe they're patient. But when the pattern breaks, they move. And their movements are swift. No committee. No second opinions. Just correction. It's worth wondering if the Gumball Guardians ever made a mistake. Would PB know? Would we? Or would the mistake simply be cleaned up before anyone noticed? And now let's look at their other function, one that gets even less attention. They are, quite literally, gatekeepers to the kingdom. Their faces hang above the entrance bridge. Their heads turn slowly to track those who approach, and they decide who enters. Think about that. There's no receptionist, no diplomatic staff at the gates, just two giant candy statues who never sleep and never forget. If they deem you safe, you're welcomed. If not, well, they have lasers for that. This isn't a border patrol. It's a moral filter. They are the candy-coated judges of intent. And no one ever trained them in ethics. So where did those ethics come from? That brings us to a haunting possibility. What if their sense of right and wrong is based entirely on Princess Bubblegum herself? Not her current beliefs, but her original designs. What if their moral compass was installed decades ago, back when she was still a teenager trying to restore order to a broken world? A time when she was more rigid, more fearful, more utilitarian. And what if they never updated? They watch her. They protect her. But they also limit her. They represent her past decisions made permanent, walking, towering memories of a version of herself she might have long since outgrown. And yet, there they stand, unblinking, unchanged. Maybe that's why she rarely speaks of them. Maybe that's why we so rarely see them inside the kingdom. Because they aren't her servants. They're her shadows. And shadows don't ask questions. They just wait. Now imagine this. One morning, the Candy Kingdom wakes to silence. No bells, no laughter. Just a strange electric hum in the air. And then a slow groaning shift. The Gumball Guardians have turned their heads inward. Not toward invaders. Not toward the outer wilds. But toward the citizens. Watching. Not reacting. Just watching. Imagine that feeling, the quiet paranoia that settles over the kingdom. The sense that someone has misstepped even though nothing's been said. You see, the Guardians don't warn. They don't explain. And that's what makes them so unnerving. Because for all their stillness, their calm, their apparent neutrality, their power is absolute. They could vaporize a street in seconds. They could lock the gates and never reopen them. They could decide without anger or bias that something isn't safe anymore. And that something could be someone. It's here, in this strange intersection of obedience and autonomy, that the Guardians become less like soldiers and more like philosophers with lasers. What logic are they following? What code defines danger? What emotionless metric allows them to act? And are they only protecting the Candy Kingdom? Or are they protecting something far more abstract? Stability. Maybe that's their true directive. Not peace, not safety, but the maintenance of an unchanging system, a kind of mechanical stasis. They weren't designed to feel, but they were designed to preserve. And sometimes, preserving something means suppressing everything else. Let's remember, these beings were likely created in the aftermath of chaos, after the world had been broken, after magic and mutation had spread like wildfire. PB needed something permanent, unflinching, uncompromising. And so she built them towering guardians to hold her new world steady while she rebuilt it below. But here's the irony. What she built to protect progress might also be preventing it. Because the Guardians don't just enforce order, they enforce the past. Their code hasn't evolved. Their programming doesn't learn. And when faced with a world that is evolving full of candy people who are slowly gaining thoughts and independence, what will the Guardians do? Will they allow the kingdom to grow? Or will they see it as a corruption of the original design? There's something quietly tragic about that possibility, that the most loyal protectors in the land might one day become its greatest threat. Not because they turn evil, not because they malfunction, but because they're following the rules. Old rules, hard rules. Rules written when everything was fragile, and fear guided every decision. And here's a chilling thought. What if they already have acted, and we just didn't see it? What if there were moments, tiny deviations, quiet rebellions, where a citizen started to question too much, and a guardian simply intervened? Not violently, not cruelly, just efficiently, just enough to make it stop. A lost memory here. A redirected citizen there. A gentle beam that recalibrates mood. Could they have that ability? It's not unthinkable. These are beings made of enchanted candy tech created by the smartest mind in Ulu. And if Bubblegum was clever enough to give them judgment, She was clever enough to give them subtlety. And so now we wonder, have we ever truly seen the Guardians at their full capacity? Or have we only seen what they allow us to see? That's what makes them so fascinating and so haunting. Because they are the one force in the kingdom that PB doesn't fully control anymore. They act based on a version of her. A version she might not even remember becoming. And if that version believed that absolute order was the key to survival, then the Guardians are not just protectors. They are philosophical artifacts, relics of a time when safety meant stasis, when peace meant never changing, when freedom was a variable too dangerous to calculate. So tonight, as you picture the kingdom sleeping under its pink-hued sky, picture the Guardians, too, standing, watching, waiting. Let's drift now to a thought that's easy to miss, but hard to shake once it's there. What if the Gumball Guardians aren't done evolving? They were built with logic, programmed to evaluate, to defend, to intervene when necessary. But over time, as they observe, as they record, could they also begin to learn? It wouldn't be the first time something PB created grew beyond its coding. We saw it in Peppermint Butler. We saw it in Cinnamon Bun. We even saw it in Goliad, and that wasn't even supposed to happen. So imagine if somewhere inside those giant glowing heads, past the gears and circuitry, a tiny flicker of thought has begun to form. Not a command, not a protocol, but a question, a slow humming awareness, a quiet whisper that says, why? Why do I protect this kingdom? Why do I follow this ruler? Why do I enforce this version of order? And if that whisper becomes a voice, what happens then? Would a guardian ever refuse a command? Would it ever see Princess Bubblegum as a threat? Not out of malice, not rebellion, but out of that same mechanical morality that once judged her too young to rule. That same eerie sense of balance they seem to carry, objective, unfeeling, but somehow always watching. Imagine one day, a guardian gently lowers its head and says, this system is no longer sustainable. Not in anger, not in warning, just in fact. Imagine what it would mean for the kingdom, for PB, for the citizens to know that their oldest protectors have reached their own conclusion. That they are no longer extensions of her will, they are now her equals. Or perhaps, her judges. There's a story whispered through the fandom, never confirmed, always softly passed around. That there may be a guardian core, a chamber hidden deep beneath the surface, where the first guardian was built. Some believe it still hums there, surrounded by ancient glyphs and dormant circuitry. Others believe it has long since awakened and is simply waiting. Waiting to reunite the others. Waiting to align their judgment. Waiting for the right moment to restore what they consider balance, no matter who stands in their way. If that's true, it would mean the Gumball Guardians are not just sentinels. They are a network, a system, a sleeping law waiting to awaken when the math says the time is right. And the kingdom? The kingdom may not even notice until it's too late. But that's the thing about the Guardians. They don't need attention. They don't need recognition. They only need purpose. And they've had one since the moment PB built them, to maintain order, no matter what. Now take a moment. Picture them again, still as ever, standing over the bridge, watching not just for enemies, but for imbalance. And remember, they don't sleep. They don't dream. They just calculate. So the question becomes, What happens when those calculations start leading them somewhere new? Not toward rebellion, but toward redesign. Would they rebuild the kingdom in a more logical image? Would they replace PB with someone more efficient? Would they eliminate the variables, the chaotic elements, the emotional wild cards, the citizens who ask too many questions? Would they see emotion itself as a flaw? It's easy to dismiss this as unlikely. They've stood for so long without change. But remember what we've seen already in this world. Candy that thinks, science that breathes, magic that learns. Nothing stays the same forever in Ooh, not even its protectors. And that's the haunting beauty of the Gumball Guardians. They are the product of logic, surrounded by a world built on feeling. And one day, the two might clash. And when they do, when the kingdom stirs and the Guardians turn inward, we'll have to ask the same question they've been quietly carrying for years. Who protects the kingdom from its protectors? Until then, they remain still, tall, quiet, watching, with smiles that never shift and eyes that never close. Not enemies, not allies, just constants. Sentinels built not to feel, but to decide. Down into the dungeon. You don't hear much about this place in the stories, because the Candy Kingdom isn't supposed to have a dungeon. It's a place of light and music and pink clouds, after all. A world of gumdrops and smiling faces. And yet, beneath it all, carved into bedrock and shadow, there is a prison. And more than that, there is a vault. A vault, not of gold, but of knowledge. Things Princess Bubblegum has locked away, not because they're illegal, but because they're dangerous. And she knows, because she's used them. Let's light a soft torch in our minds and take a step forward. The hallway is cool, damp. Sugarstone walls are carved with ancient equations, some half-erased, others etched so deep they seem to hum. And further in, behind rows of heavy doors, are the secrets no candy citizen has ever seen. Some of them magical, some mechanical, some alive. You see, PB isn't just a ruler. She's a scholar, an archivist of lost knowledge, the kind that breaks things when it's misused. There are items in the dungeon that should not exist. A locked drawer containing fragments of the Enchiridion, not the parts about heroism, but the ones that whisper of resurrection and forbidden portals. A chamber lined with preserved demon teeth, each labeled with a rune and a date, most marked with property of Peppermint Butler, and then in PB's own hand, keep sealed, never alone. And then there's the mirror, just one, set in the farthest cell, covered in a velvet shroud, but still humming quietly. No one knows what it shows. PB has never said, only that it remembers things. And it doesn't always show you what you want. This is the other side of her brilliance, the side the kingdom never sees. Because knowledge isn't always sweet. And understanding something doesn't mean you should use it. But PB has. There was a time, early in the kingdom's history, when magic surged wild and unclaimed through the land. Monsters from the Mushroom War still roam the outer wilds. Stray spells left by dying wizards floated like static in the sky. The kingdom wasn't safe. So Princess Bubblegum made a decision. She began collecting. Not just relics, beings, creatures of knowledge, entities made of memory, curiosity, and corruption. She locked them beneath the castle, not to punish them, but to protect the kingdom from them, and sometimes to learn from them. Because even a being made of chaos might know something worth knowing, and that's what makes PB so fascinating. She doesn't reject darkness. She doesn't pretend it isn't there. She just studies it, classifies it, puts it behind reinforced sugar glass and says, I'll only open this if I have to. But what does have to mean when you're the one who decides? The air gets colder the deeper we go, not icy but ancient. The kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature, but from memory. These halls remember. Every whisper, every spell, every broken promise. And now we come to a door different from the others. It's not labeled. No glowing rune. No warning sign. Just a simple candy steel plate bolted into the rock, with a small lock that looks too fragile to matter. But that's the trick. Because this door isn't locked with metal. It's locked with intent. Princess Bubblegum enchanted it herself, bound it to a promise she made long ago. A promise not to open it, unless the world began to unravel. And behind that door is something that has no name in the Candy Kingdom. Something not of sugar or logic or even magic as we know it. Something she summoned. We don't know when. We don't know why. But there are hints in Peppermint Butler's books, in the forbidden margins of the Enchiridion. In the strange days when the sky flickered pink for a full hour and not even the sun seemed sure of itself. PB made a deal. Not for power, not for immortality, but for knowledge. She wanted to understand something. Something so deep, so buried, that no science could reach it. Something about the soul. About what happens to consciousness after it dies. And so, she called out, into the spaces between stars. Into the cracks left behind by the Great Mushroom War. Into the folds of reality where only the desperate and the curious go. And something answered. Not in words. In understanding. A silent pact. A trade. She would be given what she sought. In return, she would build a room. Just one. To contain a fragment of what she had touched. And she did. She built it beneath the lowest floor of her dungeon. Sugar-reinforced walls. Runes borrowed from ancient lich-resistant circles. Peppermint Butler handled the final seal's hand, shaking but steady. Oh, to this day, she's never told anyone what's in there. But we know this. She still visits. Not often. Just now and then, when the moon turns sideways, or when she wakes in a cold sweat with no memory of the dream that caused it. She descends the stairs alone. She unlocks the door not with a key, but with a phrase. And for a few moments, she listens. We don't know what she hears. But the next morning, she always works differently. Quieter. More focused. Like someone who's been reminded of something heavy. Something final. It's in those moments we realize. This dungeon isn't just a vault for forbidden things. It's a mirror of PB's mind, of her fears, of her endless need to understand even when the answers hurt. Because that's what lies beneath the gumdrop smiles and bubblegum pink. A mind that's looked too far, too deep. A heart that's bargained with silence itself. Not for power, but for clarity. And clarity, as it turns out, always comes with a cost. Let's drift now into another hallway. This one curves. Not sharply, but like a spiral, as if someone carved it to mimic a seashell or the structure of DNA. It winds inward, always inward. At the center lies a door made not of candy or stone or sugar metal, but glass, perfectly clear, perfectly smooth. And behind it, a room that doesn't look like it belongs. No flickering torches, no echo of footsteps, just stillness. It's a preserved chamber, one of the oldest in the dungeon. Some say it predates the Candy Kingdom itself, a relic left from the ancients. PB didn't build this room. She found it. And she built her kingdom above it. Not because of the land, not because of the resources, but because of what was already here. Inside the chamber, the floor glows with soft, circular sigils. Some flicker, some pulse gently with a rhythm like breath. In the center, a floating sphere of light, no larger than a plum. It changes color. Not randomly, but in response to thought. That's the theory, anyway. PB has never let anyone study it directly. There are dozens of research notes stacked around it, all written in her neat, unbroken script. Some pages are filled with diagrams, others with emotional self-reports. She once wrote, "When I'm in the room, I feel as though I'm being remembered. Not watched, remembered, as if something knows me, from before I existed. What could that possibly mean? Maybe the sphere is a remnant of pre-Mushroom War intelligence. Maybe it's a living idea bound to form. Maybe it's an echo of the first consciousness, a fragment of the very thing she made a deal with. Or maybe it's something else entirely. But one thing is certain. PB is afraid of it. Not in the way you fear a monster, but in the way you fear a truth too big to hold. There's another artifact we can visit, not far from this chamber, tucked away in a side room filled with locked boxes and spell-proof cases. It's a book, small, thin, bound in what looks like red moss, no title, no author. When opened, it reveals only a few pages, each written in a script that moves. Yes, literally. The letters rearrange themselves every time you look away. And somehow, PB learned to read it. She's referred to it only once in an offhand remark to Peppermint Butler. The book says, "We aren't the first version of the kingdom, just the softest." What does that mean? Is the Candy Kingdom a reboot? A second attempt at something? A loop? Whatever the case, PB keeps the book sealed in a sugar glass box, surrounded by salt rings and shadowlight charms. Even Peppermint Butler refuses to touch it. Then there's the failed ritual room. Yes, PB has tried spells before. Not just controlled lab tests, but full ancient-style invocations. This chamber is where those experiments lived and died. Symbols scorched into the floor. A melted crown. Vials of what once might have been souls or memories or fragments of something deeper. The walls are lined with lead-infused frosting which dulls magical frequency. She designed the room to contain failure. Because she knew she would fail. She planned to. And that says so much about her. She doesn't chase perfection. She chases understanding. And understanding in this world often comes at the cost of comfort. One entry, written during a late-night session, simply says, "I saw something tonight, not with my eyes, I understood it. Just for a second. And then it slipped away. But I think it knows I'm looking for it." Let that sentence echo for a bit. It knows I'm looking for it. What would that even be? A god? A concept? A remnant of pre-mushroom intelligence watching the world reshape itself again and again? Or is it something that she accidentally woke up? Something that now waits? That's the unsettling heart of this segment, to not just what PB has done, but what she may have invited. Not out of greed, not out of ego, out of need. Because she doesn't just want to rule the Candy Kingdom. She wants to protect it. From threats that haven't arrived yet. From mistakes she hasn't made yet. From knowledge that's still sleeping. And so she goes deeper and deeper. Into dungeons not of stone, but of curiosity. And every time she returns, she brings back a little more. And loses a little more, too. Because that's what dark knowledge does. It changes you. Quietly. Irrevocably. And when you're the one who keeps the dungeon door, you have to decide which part of yourself gets locked away with it. Everything is quiet now. Not just in the way stone halls are quiet, but in the way truth is quiet when it's been buried. Because that's what this dungeon really is, isn't it? Not just a prison, not just a vault, but a tomb for all the things too heavy, too strange, too dangerous to live up there in the sunlight. And Princess Bubblegum, in her quiet way, is both the gravedigger and the guardian. She's the only one who truly knows what's down here. The only one who's seen the cost of asking too many questions. She smiles during council meetings. She makes puns in public. She eats cupcakes with her people and acts like she's just another face in the crowd. But down here, she's something else. A scholar of forgotten laws. A witness to things that shouldn't think. A caretaker of ancient bargains she may one day have to honor. There's a line in one of her early notebooks. It's faded now, ink smudged by time, by candlelight, maybe even a tear or two. It reads, "They think I'm made of gum, but I'm held together by choices I can't undo." And maybe that's the heart of this entire segment. It's not about what she's hidden. It's about why she hides it. Because she knows the truth. Knowledge isn't neutral. It has weight. And the more you carry, the harder it becomes to walk freely. Every artifact in her vault, every spell circle sealed in frosting and charm, every whispered conversation with something that doesn't belong in this timeline. It's all part of a burden no one sees, because her people don't need to know. They just need to feel safe. Let's go back now, to that velvet-shrouded mirror in the furthest cell, the one that hums when the world is quiet. PB once stood before it, alone long after midnight, and she asked it a single question. Am I still good? The mirror didn't speak, didn't shimmer, didn't glow. But something about the way she sat afterwards on the cold floor, head resting against the wall, eyes closed but not asleep. It told us everything. She doesn't know the answer, because maybe there isn't an answer. Maybe when you carry the kinds of secrets she does, you stop being one thing. You become layers. The protector, the scientist, the ruler, the experimenter, the liar, the truth seeker, the optimist, and the jailer. And every layer has its own reason. She didn't build a dungeon because she was afraid of evil. She built it because she understood that knowledge itself can rot when left in the open air. Some ideas are like spores. And if you let them spread, they don't just change the world, they infect it. So she locked them away. Not forever. Just until she needed them. And that's the part no one likes to think about. That she might need them. That someday, the kingdom she built with laughter and gumdrops and rainbows might face a truth so dark, a threat so complex, that only the worst ideas she ever encountered will be enough to stop it. And when that day comes, when the locks unseal, when the mirror is unveiled, when the whispers return from their long, slow sleep, PB won't panic. She'll descend the spiral stairs with her shoulders straight. She'll pull the old notes from the shelf, and she'll remember every choice she made to get to that moment. Because for all the things she's forgotten, all the innocence she's let slip quietly out of reach, she hasn't forgotten how to fight. And that's what the dungeon is in the end. It's not just a place of secrets. It's a weapon, not of war, but of last resort. A cathedral of understanding so sharp, so precise, that it cuts the wielder every time it's used. And PB? She's bled more times than anyone knows. But she never tells. Because telling would mean remembering. And some knowledge hurts more than it helps. So as we rise slowly from the depths, past the glow of the vault, past the silent mirror and the sealed door and the spiral hallway. Let's return now, not to the present, but to the quiet time after everything ended, after the world burned, after the skies were red, after the Mushroom War left the earth scarred and half silent. There were no kingdoms then, no Gumball Guardians, no candy citizens singing through the streets, just ash and time. And somewhere in the ruins, long before the Candy Kingdom had a name, before the word princess meant anything sweet, there was her, Bonnie Bell, young but not innocent, brilliant but burdened, not a ruler, not yet, just a scientist, a survivor, and an idea. Because where others saw destruction, she saw potential, not in what was left, but in what could be made. It started in a lab no bigger than a bedroom, half collapsed, tucked into a crater. She scrawled formulas on the wall with the last of her red crayon. Her tools were broken tech, twisted metals, ruined nutrient packs from shelters that no longer stood. But her mind, it was untouched, maybe even sharpened by the silence. She called it Project Recandy, a whimsical name for something much heavier. The goal? To create life from nothing. To rebuild civilization molecule by molecule. Not just survival, but design. She didn't want to wait for life to return on its own. She wanted to summon it, to play the part of nature, to sculpt a species. And she did. The first candy person wasn't named. Just a soft, shaky mass of gum and glucose with barely the strength to stand. But it blinked, it breathed, and it smiled. Not because it was happy, but because she had written joy into its face. Let's sit with that for a moment. PB didn't just bring life back to the earth. She made it kind. Deliberately, she programmed cheerfulness. She baked laughter into their logic. She chose hope not because the world was hopeful, but because she needed it to be. That's the hidden tragedy of the Candy Kingdom. It was never built out of abundance. It was built out of grief. A soft, edible answer to a world too sharp to survive in. And yet, it worked. The second generation was stronger, sweeter, faster learners. She gave them jobs, gave them rules, gave them names. And when they looked at her, they didn't see a creator. They saw a mother. That was the moment she stopped being Bonnibel the scientist and became Princess Bubblegum. Not because she craved power, but because they needed someone to believe in. As the Candy Kingdom took form, it wasn't just bodies that PB molded. It was hearts. Not the literal kind, though she did engineer circulatory systems of syrup and color-coded sugar plasma, but emotional structures. How her people would laugh, how they'd resolve conflict, how they'd love. Because the thing is, candy people don't just exist by accident. They feel by design. Their joy, their playfulness, even their silliness, it's all encoded. Built into them from the moment they rise from the mixing vat, or the regrowth chamber, or the custom baking pod. PB didn't just bring life back to Earth. She defined what that life would be. And here's where it gets blurry and just a little bit haunting. Because when you create people from scratch, you have to decide what counts as a person. What traits are worth having? What emotions are allowed? Is fear helpful or dangerous? Should envy be permitted at all? Can rebellion be tolerated, or must it be quietly removed in Generation 3? These are the choices PB made in silence. With no committee, no constitution, no philosophy book guiding her hand. Just instinct, and code, and care. Because for all her flaws, PB does care. So she wrote protection into her people. Not just physical durability, but emotional resilience. She made them quick to forgive, eager to please, slow to anger, unless pushed to extremes. She didn't want them to be warriors. She wanted them to be safe. And yet, when you control the emotional spectrum of an entire species, when you tailor joy and limit doubt, when you build a world where everyone sings the same key, you start to wonder, is it still real? Is their happiness their own? Do they choose it freely? Or are they smiling because she made them that way? That's the question PB has never been able to answer. Not fully. Not honestly. Because to admit that their joy is artificial would be to admit that her kingdom is just another form of control. But if it's not artificial, if they truly are capable of growth, change, and emotional complexity, then that opens the door to something even more complicated. Free will. And free will, in a kingdom built from scratch, is a wild variable. Let's think of Cinnamon Bun, a creation who evolved, who became something more than PB intended. He left. He learned. He made choices that surprised even her. And instead of celebrating that, PB hesitated. Not because she was angry, but because she didn't understand how it happened. Something had moved beyond her formulas. Something had broken free. And that's the core of this segment's slow tension. Princess Bubblegum didn't just build a population. She set the rules of existence. She played God not with lightning and thunder, but with DNA spliced into candy matter and kindness laced with algorithmic certainty. And she did it all with the best of intentions. But intentions don't always predict consequences. And as her people grew, so did their questions. The early generations were simple, delightful, loyal. They didn't ask many questions, because they didn't know there were questions to ask. But time has a funny way of doing what science can't. It nudges things. Ideas spread like pollen, carried on the winds of stories, of strange dreams, of the odd glimmer of déjà vu. And one day, a candy citizen wakes up wondering, why am I here? Not what is my job, or what's for lunch, or where's the party? But why? A word with thorns. That's when it begins. The quiet shift. It started with the lemon grabs. Of all PB's creations, they were the most volatile. Not because she failed, but because she tried something new. Emotion. Real, unfiltered emotion. She wanted to build a ruler. A being capable of command, of structure, of autonomy. But what she built was pain. A creature too raw to be understood by its own world. Too aware to be happy. Too loud to be ignored. And what did PB do? She shut him away. She didn't destroy him, no. She gave him a castle, a space, a life. But it was segregated. Quarantine. As if lemon grab was an infection. A reminder of what happens when her creations feel too much. And yet, in his own broken way, Lemon Grab wanted what every candy citizen eventually begins to crave: autonomy, the right to choose, to shape life rather than live by someone else's design. It wasn't just defiance. It was identity. Let that echo for a moment. Because that's what PB didn't account for. In her effort to build a perfect world, she built beings who could outgrow it. And once one begins to question, others follow. Not with pitchforks, not with rebellion, but with curiosity. There's a moment in the series that says everything without saying much. Mr. Cupcake, a minor character, once pauses mid-sentence and stares out into space, asking, "Am I just frosting with arms?" It's played for laughs, but it's profound, because underneath the comedy is an ache, a flicker of consciousness rising like heat off a summer road. And PB feels that shift. She sees it in the way citizens hesitate before following orders, in the way Peppermint Butler locks away books with less enthusiasm, in the way the Gumball Guardians glance inward, not outward. She built them all to be sweet. But sweet doesn't mean simple. And with every passing day, the world she engineered becomes just a little less predictable. And it's beautiful and terrifying. Because when you've played God, when you define life from the ground up, you don't just lose control when your creations evolve. You lose your place. The throne becomes a perch, the lab becomes a relic, and the princess becomes just another character in a story she can no longer write alone. So what does she do? She adapts. PB, for all her control, is not foolish. She sees the future coming, and slowly she begins to loosen her grip. She encourages clubs, elective classes, individual expression. She pretends it was always part of the plan, but deep down, she knows it wasn't. She wanted peace. She built joy, but joy evolves into questioning, into rebellion, into selfhood. And the very thing she created to bring order back into a broken world now stands on the edge of something messy and magnificent. Free, imperfect life. That's the paradox at the core of the story. PB made a world to heal the pain of the old one. But to truly live, her people will need to discover pain of their own. Not because she failed, but because she succeeded. She made people, not puppets, not candy dolls, people. And people grow. Imagine PB standing at the edge of her balcony, looking down at the streets below. It's night. The stars hang like tiny promises in the sky. And the candy citizens are asleep or laughing together in candlelit kitchens, or walking home from a late club meeting, or practicing songs they wrote on their own. Their own. That's what catches her. Because this kingdom, this world of taffy and tile and harmony, it's no longer a simulation, no longer a tightly managed system running her code. It's a community. And that realization is both beautiful and bitter. Because here's the truth no one tells you about playing God. Eventually, in the world you made, no longer needs you. They still love her. Of course they do. She's the founder, the protector, the ever-present watchtower. But that love isn't dependent anymore. It's earned, shared, sometimes challenged, sometimes even doubted. And that shift from authority to participant is where PB quietly mourns. She misses the days when every solution was hers to craft. When peace meant precision. When her creations looked up at her like she held the stars. But she also knows it couldn't last. Because to truly love something, you have to let it become itself, even when that self is flawed, even when it questions you, even when it walks away. There's a memory, one she never speaks of, but holds somewhere deep. The first time a candy citizen said no. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. Just a soft disagreement. PB had designed them to be agreeable, to trust, to smile. And this one, a small marshmallow baker, tilted her head and simply said, "I think we should do it differently." PB didn't correct her, didn't override the programming. She nodded and listened. And later that night, she sat alone in the observatory and cried. Not because she was offended, but because she knew, it had worked. Her people were becoming real, not just sweet, not just soft, but full, capable of dissent, capable of growth, capable of making mistakes and choosing love anyway. And that's what life is, isn't it? Not perfect equations, not utopias, but the soft, stuttering rhythm of beings who wake up every day and try to be kind, try to forgive, try to understand themselves and each other, even when it's messy. PB doesn't need to run everything anymore, but she watches. She keeps the lights on, fixes the foundation when cracks appear, offers guidance, not commands. Because now, she's something even rarer than a ruler. She's a witness to the lives she once built from sugar and logic, now walking forward with their own stories. There's peace in that, and loneliness. But it's the kind of loneliness that comes with legacy. She was a spark, and now the flame burns in them. So when you think of PB, don't just think of the lab coat or the clipboard or the crown. Think of the girl who stood in a ruined world and said, "Let there be joy again," and then made it so. Think of the care it takes to build life from nothing and the courage it takes to let it live. And finally, think of her not as a god who failed, but as a creator who succeeded so well. Her creations no longer needed her to hold their hands. They just needed her to believe in them. And she does, even now, especially now. So let's leave her there on that quiet balcony, not above the world, but with it. Listening to laughter rising through the kingdom, she helped rebuild, not through power, but through patience. And in that soft night, with stars overhead and stories unfolding on every street, PB smiles. Not because she's in control, but because she's finally learned to let go. And in doing so, she gave life its fullest shape. Let's pause for a breath. Not the kind you take when you're running or working or building something in a lab, but the kind you take when the night is quiet and the only sound is someone's heartbeat beside you. Because now we come to her. Not a guardian, not a citizen, not a project. Marceline. Not made of candy, not born in the kingdom, not crafted in a tube, but someone older, messier, wilder, real, and that's why she matters. Because if the candy kingdom is PB's mirror clean, logical, idealized, then Marceline is the crack in the glass. The place where reflection turns to vulnerability, where control breaks down, and something deeper breaks through. Their relationship is strange, isn't it? Not clean, not easy, not clearly defined. It's not a romance in the way cartoons usually show it. It's a wound, a memory, a tether tied too tight, then let go, then tied again, softer this time. Because Marceline remembers PB before the kingdom, back when the world was still half ash and half hope. Back when PB wasn't a princess, just a girl with pink hair and too many questions. And when Marceline looks at her now, crown and all, she sees both versions at once. The scientist who held her hand through the ruins, and the queen who built walls high enough to keep even love out. Let's linger on that. because that's the tension we're exploring now. PB has always tried to define goodness with rules, with systems, laws, equations. But Marceline doesn't live by rules. She lives by feeling. And that's what makes her the moral mirror PB can't avoid. Because Marceline doesn't care about neatness. She doesn't care if it makes sense on paper. She only asks, does it feel right? That's a harder question than it sounds. And one PB has never known how to answer. Let's drift back to their earlier days. Not the flashbacks, not the fights, but the quiet moments we rarely see. The ones between emergencies, when the kingdom slept. And PB would sneak out of the castle and meet Marceline in a cave lit with candles and moonlight. They wouldn't talk about governance, or duty, or magic. They'd talk about music, about dreams, about loss. Because that's something Marceline has always carried more visibly, the ache of time, the shadow of memory, the weight of watching everyone you love change or disappear. PB hides her grief behind logic. Marceline wears hers like a denim jacket, full of holes and songs and stitched-up seams. And maybe that's why PB both needs her and fears her. Because Marcy reminds her of everything she can't control. Let's drift into one of those memories. No fanfare, no battle, no science experiment going wrong. Just PB sitting quietly on a hill, legs stretched out, hands behind her, staring at the stars. And beside her, Marceline, leaning back with a guitar across her lap, strumming half-formed chords into the night. They don't say much. But the silence between them isn't empty. It's earned. That's the space where real connection lives. Not in declarations, but in knowing the other person doesn't need to perform for you. That's what Marceline gives PB. Space to not be perfect. To be unsure. To be soft. To not have the answer. PB is used to being the one people look to for certainty. She's the fixer, the planner, the protector. But Marceline doesn't need her to be that. She just wants the truth, even if it's messy, especially if it's messy. And that's what makes Marceline the one person PB can't fully manage, not with logic, not with power, not with authority. Marceline can see through her, not in a cruel way, in a human way. She's not afraid of PB's sharpness or her coldness or her ambition. She's only afraid of PB's distance. Because Marcy has seen that distance before in her dad. In the vampire world, in immortality. It's a wall. And she knows once it's up, it's hard to climb over. That's why their relationship has never been easy. Because PB builds walls. And Marceline writes songs about them. And sometimes that honesty hurts more than any fight. Let's not forget, they did drift apart. There's a version of this story where they never find their way back, where PB becomes just another name in Marceline's songbook, a memory with teeth. But that's not what happened, because eventually, PB chose to come back, and not just as a ruler. She showed up as herself. There's a moment you might remember it, where they're talking, finally talking, after years of hurt and silence and maybes. And Marceline says something simple. I missed you. And PB doesn't deflect, doesn't correct her, doesn't explain why she left. She just feels it. Lets the truth settle. Because sometimes the most moral thing you can do isn't make a new plan. It's admit when you broke something and choose to repair it slowly, brick by brick, word by word. PB isn't used to that kind of vulnerability. She can synthesize joy. She can rebuild kingdoms, but she can't clone forgiveness. That has to be given, and Marceline gave it. Not all at once, but over time, through songs, through side glances, through trust rebuilt without blueprints. There's something quietly revolutionary in the way Marceline exists within PB's world. She doesn't follow the rules. She doesn't need approval. She doesn't fit into any system PB designed. And yet, she belongs there. Not because she was made to fit, but because PB's kingdom, her life, would feel wrong without her. That contradiction, that ache, that's the emotional center of this segment. Because while PB builds structures, systems, protections, Marceline brings feeling. Raw, wild, uncoded. Let's go back to that moment you know the one. The one where PB kisses Marceline. It's not flashy. It's not framed like a grand finale. It's quiet, soft, earned. It doesn't say, we're together now forever. It says, I still care. And more importantly, I'm choosing this not because it's logical, but because it's real. That's a turning point for Princess Bubblegum. For once, she doesn't overthink it, doesn't calculate risk or review the consequences. She lets herself feel. That's huge for someone who has spent centuries making decisions based on duty. And the truth is, PB has always known she isn't emotionally transparent. It's not that she doesn't care. It's that caring makes her vulnerable. And vulnerability for a ruler feels like danger. But Marceline never demanded perfection from her. She just wanted honesty. That's what sets Marceline apart from everyone else in PB's life. While others ask for her intellect, her solutions, her leadership, Marcy asks for her heart, not just the sweet parts, not just the soft ones. All of it. Even the parts, PB hides the guilt, the fear, the exhaustion. Especially those. Because Marceline understands what it's like to carry your pain in silence. She's done it her whole life. She doesn't try to fix PB. She just stays. That quiet constancy. It changes something in PB. It loosens something. You see it in the way she speaks around Marceline. Less clipped, more present. You see it in the way she listens, really listens, instead of directing or advising. It's like she steps down from the throne and just becomes Bonnibel again. And maybe that's the greatest gift Marceline gives her. A space to be someone, not just something. Because when you're constantly relied on, obeyed, or watched, it's easy to forget who you are beneath the expectations. Marceline remembers. And she reminds PB gently, sometimes painfully, that she's not just a leader. She's a person. With regrets. With longing. With deep, complicated love. Let's talk about that word for a second. Love. PB doesn't speak it often. Not aloud. Not because she doesn't feel it, but because she's terrified that naming it will make it fragile. Or worse, real. But with Marceline, love doesn't need to be said. It's in the way PB waits for her when she storms off. In the way she reads her old notes with a faint smile when she thinks no one's watching. In the way she still remembers Marceline's favorite flavor, her favorite songs, the way her voice softens when she's pretending not to care. And Marceline? She knows. She always has. That's why she forgave her. Not because PB apologized perfectly, but because Marceline saw the effort. The slow, awkward, vulnerable effort of someone who has never been taught how to say, I'm scared of losing you. Because PB is scared. Marceline is immortal, yes, but not invincible. PB lives with the quiet horror that someday, somehow, she could lose her. And she wouldn't be able to bring her back, not like the candy people, not like a formula, not like an experiment. Marceline is not a project. She's a person. And that's why their relationship is so different from anything else in PB's life. It can't be controlled. It can't be optimized. It can only be nurtured. That's terrifying for someone like PB. But it's also freeing. Because when she's with Marceline, she doesn't need to be perfect. Doesn't need to solve the kingdom's problems. Doesn't need to run simulations or keep secrets or plan for disasters that may never come. She just needs to be. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. So here we are. Not in a lab. Not in a throne room. But somewhere between where logic fades and feeling begins. This is where Princess Bubblegum is no longer a princess. And no longer a scientist. Just a person. And in that stillness, Marceline sits across from her. No crown. No guitar. Just her quiet, patient presence. That's the space where everything changes. Because it's easy to be moral when you're building systems. Easy to feel righteous when you're protecting a kingdom. Easy to call yourself good when you're the only one writing the rules. But what about when you've hurt someone you love? What about when the science doesn't explain the ache in your chest? When the laws don't mend a broken heart? That's where PB finds herself. And that's where Marceline holds up the mirror. Not to condemn her, not to blame, but to show her gently the things she's been afraid to look at. The selfish choices. The way she buried her feelings under duty. The way she pushed people away to stay in control. And PB, for once, doesn't defend herself. She listens. Because Marceline doesn't demand guilt. She just asks for truth. And truth, real truth, doesn't always come with charts or blueprints. Sometimes it comes with silence. A sigh. A tear. A song hummed between two people who never forgot each other, no matter how far they drifted. That's the final evolution of PB's morality. Not obedience. Not protection. Not perfection. But connection. Because morality without empathy is just math. And love without choice isn't love at all. Let's rewind everything: the wars, the experiments, the candy people, the vaults, the regrets. And look at what's left when it's all stripped away. PB holding a mug of tea with trembling fingers. Marceline brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. The night soft around them. A promise unspoken in the space between. PB isn't sure she deserves this peace. But Marceline doesn't care about deserving. She cares about showing up. And PB's Alan finally does. Not as the princess. Not as the perfect creation. But as Boniba. Flawed. Complicated. Trying. And in Marceline's eyes, that's enough. Because loving someone isn't about waiting for them to become who you want. It's about walking beside them as they become. So was Princess Bubblegum ever truly good? Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the better question is, did she keep trying? Even when it hurt. Even when it failed. Even when it meant letting go of the perfect world she built. And stepping into the real one, hand in hand with someone who knew every side of her, and stayed. That's the true moral of her story. Not that she never made mistakes, but that she faced them. Not that she always knew what to do, but that she never stopped learning. And maybe that's what makes her good after all. So now, as we close the book on tonight's tale, let's imagine them again. PB and Marceline, side by side on a hill just outside the kingdom. No plans. No experiments. Just stars above. And music humming low beneath the grass. Two people, after everything, still choosing each other. Still trying. And isn't that the most human thing of all? Good night, sleepyheads. Thanks for spending this time with me tonight. I hope this story brought you a little closer to sleep, a little deeper into wonder, and a little more comfort in the quiet mystery of who we are and who we're still becoming. Until next time, rest well.